Yeah, that's not an example.
Sorry, you haven't.
It is an example.
You haven't explained how a gradient violates the second law. It doesn't. That's the end of this conversation. A gradient does not violate the second law. If it did, then it wouldn't be a natural law anymore.
Because a gas must obey Boyle's law for gases. That's why.
Brenda, it also has to
That
obey
kind
the
of,
second
that's a
law as
pure
well.
fantasy statement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brenda,
A gradient is something that
in your
settles
globe Earth
after
model,
everything has, after the gas has filled the container, then a gradient can set in for whatever reason.
It
But
can't.
Brenda,
That would be
if
a
the
violation
gas
of the
has
second
not
law.
settled in a container, it will not form a gradient.
Hold
It
on a
will
second. Sorry,
disperse until
Brenda.
equilibrium has
Sorry,
been found.
guys. Sorry. Can you clarify what Boyle's law is?
It has to do with pressure and volume. That there's a relation between if the temperature is constant, then you have pressure and volume.
Sorry,
Right, the gas
volume
pressure
of. Sorry,
fills the
volume of
volume.
what? Volume of what?
Of the container.
Sorry, so this applies to Earth because we have a container, does it?
I said, this is doing an internal critique of your system. Your system, in your system, we live in a container, right?
No, the necessary antecedent.
That's why we have an atmosphere.
Sorry, yeah,
That's
the necessary antecedent is a
the
container. So, as
Yeah.
adequately described by Boyle's law, he describes the necessity for a container in that law, doesn't he, Brenda?
Yeah.
So we must have a container then. So the necessary antecedent for I hadn't finished. Hadn't finished. So the necessary antecedent for Boyle's law to apply at all is a container.
Yep.
Boyle's law simply
Yeah.
states.
Yeah.
Boyle's
You just
law
said it
states.
yourself.
Keep digging, Brenda.
Boyle's
You
law.
just said
states-
it yourself. Or are you already like dismantling your own consciousness with what you said yourself just now?
Boyle's law states.
what does the exactly what?
Requires a container. That's what you stated.
That's not what
It's
Boyle's
in-
law states.
Oh really? Tell us what it states. Tell us where it explains how the volume can decrease. Of what would the volume of what would it be if it's not the volume of a container exactly? Is that specifically what it's talking about? The volume of what decreasing, Brenda?
For a given quantity of gas, right, its pressure varies inversely with the volume
Volume of what?
of the container.
So you definitely need a container for this law to be applicable then.
That doesn't follow.
It's called a law, Boyle's law, and it specifically says there is the necessity for a container for this to apply.
No, it
and the
does not say
reason
that.
is quite simple, because if you didn't have a container, then it wouldn't be applicable to a volume of something, because you don't have a volume if you don't have a container. And you do definitely need a container to have gas pressure. So to vary that pressure by increasing and decreasing the container, it's still, like a gas pressure gradient, implies that you must have the necessary antecedent, a container. So, now I'd like to know how Boyle's law applies to your fundy fantasy of a containerless Earth.
Boyle's law does not state that you must necessarily have a container. It
Yes,
says
it does. Yes, it
if-
does.
Yeah, you just said it.
Yes, it does.
Dumbass.
So when he's talking about the volume of something, Brenda, you're saying he's talking about the volume of a non-container, a container without having any volume to increase or decrease. Explain to me how you can increase and decrease the volume of a non-container. Explain that to me.
It says if you have a volume of gas in a container, then
Don't you?
the pressure will vary inversely with the volume.
Right, so it only applies to gas pressure in a container, specifically,
Yeah.
as you just
Yes,
stated.
you're right.
Excellent.
So,
It,
what is
therefore,
your
it doesn't,
what is your
therefore
claim?
it doesn't apply to the Earth's atmosphere, does it then? Does it doesn't
Right. So you're saying that...
Thank you, Arwen, for
No,
demonstrating.
sorry. So you're saying that suddenly that the law that the gas must abide by, which is to say that it's dictated by the volume of the container, you're saying because you have a fundamentalist belief that Earth is an open system without a container, even though that violates the second law of thermodynamics and pisses in the face of Boyle's law. You're saying that Boyle's law just doesn't apply to your fundy belief. Yeah, you'd be right about that. Your fundamentalist belief in Earth as an open system generally violates quite a few laws.
I'm saying that Boyle's law
That's a bit
applies to
inverted,
your model.
My model, there's no model being described.
like
There's
the
no
one
model
religious
in play. It's
conception
the
that
necessary
applies.
antecedent to have gas pressure. It's not a model, it's a necessary antecedent. Do you know what an antecedent is? Antecedent
Your
consequent
model.
relationships? Do you know what they are?
Your model is that
Not
we
model,
live in a pressurized container.
antecedent. Stop misrepresenting me. This isn't a model. It's an
Do you think that-
antecedent.
Do you think that we don't live in a pressurized container?
We definitely have gas pressure, and the antecedent is a container.
Yeah, so therefore we have gas pressure, therefore we live in a container, right?
Well said, Brenda.
Yes. So
All right.
right, so Boyle's law.
Right, yeah, that's well said, Brenda. Thank you very much. That's correct. So based on the necessary antecedent to have gas pressure, you can assert that given we have gas pressure, it must be pressing on something. Yeah, I'd agree. Because if it wasn't, and it was still here, it would violate the second law of thermodynamics.
If there, however, since there is a pressure gradient, that does violate the second law.
No, it doesn't violate the second law. The pressure still requires the necessary antecedent. Being gradiated, which has been demonstrated by Good Times for All, doesn't violate any laws. The gradiated factor doesn't suddenly mean you negate the need for a container.
No, the existence of a pressure gradient on the Earth violates the second law.
Then it wouldn't be a law.
That's not my point.
Then it would not be a law if the very nature of our reality defied something they classify as a law. Then it would not be a law, Brenda.
That's right. Then you need
Yeah, that's right. So it doesn't violate that law, because if it did, it would no longer be a law. So there's definitely no violation going on just because we have a gas pressure gradient. It definitely does not violate that law. What does violate that law is an assertion that you can have gas pressure with nothing to press upon, and not dispersing into the available space.
But you just proved that that the second law doesn't work.
Oh, so you think I've disproved the second law of thermodynamics? Wow, Brenda, I expect a Nobel Prize.
Yes, you just proved the second law doesn't work. Therefore, you can't use it against globe earthers.
So you think it doesn't work because you have a fundamentalist belief in the sky vacuum? No, that's just your fundy belief. That doesn't suddenly negate the second law of thermodynamics because you've got a fundy belief in the sky vacuum.
I don't think that. You do.
I think
You
there's a
think
sky vacuum.
that
Oh,
the
let's just clear that straight away. No, that's definitely incorrect. I know that you cannot have gas pressure next to a vacuum. The sky is definitely not a vacuum. If you were in any way under the impression that I believe the sky is a vacuum, then I'm going to clear that up and say no. Definitely not. I don't think the sky is a vacuum. You, the fundy zealot, who thinks that you can have second law of thermodynamics violations, or that the second law of thermodynamics doesn't apply because you've got a fundamentalist sky vacuum belief, you are the one who believes in a fundamentalist bullshit nonsense called the sky vacuum. That definitely isn't me, Brenda.
Does the second law exist and apply, or does it not?
It's a law of nature. Do you think it gets the name law of nature by only applying some of the time? I'll assure you of something else. It's only called a natural law because it happens always, without exception. If it was that there was any exception demonstrated, then it would no longer be a law of nature, because clearly it can be violated. So no, your fundy belief in a sky vacuum definitely doesn't undo a law of nature. It just remains your fundamentalist belief.